Yeah, so I really liked Howard's presentation that talked about telling stories, and individual stories and case studies are really, really help provide a concrete grounding to how to put together successful projects. So we've brought together 4 projects today, and I've asked the teams to spend a little bit of time just describing a little bit of the project, but then some of the lessons learned along the way. And then we're going to open up for Q&A. So we'll have roughly half hour of these initial remarks, and then we'll have about half hour for Q&A. We put on an energy symposium a couple weeks ago at CSU, and I was moderating a session on technology, and as I looked down at my 8 presenters, you know, the words that struck out at me was, wow, this is a manel. I mean, this is a panel of 8 men presenting on their technologies. And once again, we have a manel here. We really do fund women at ARPA-E, and I am once again reminded that I need to work harder to make sure that we have diversity on the groups.
My best teams, by the way, including that Sunfolded team, CEO woman.
And yes, and we've got even here at yes. So with that, I'm going to turn over to the teams, and I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves.
All right, so my name is Ryan O'Hare. I'm a professor of metallurgical and materials engineering at the Colorado School of Mines. I also direct our interdisciplinary materials science graduate program. And right now I'm serving on 3 ARPA-E teams. So I like to say that ARPA-E owns my life. I pretty much do. With quarterly site visits times 3 projects, and quarterly reports times 3 projects, it's basically every week. So those 3 projects total about $9 million, and I'm not going to go through all the details. The very first one, we basically did everything that Bryan said you're not supposed to do. We didn't engage early. We were very naive in the process. We applied basically after the FOA came out. But we had a really creative technology. We proposed something that was pretty wild but feasible, very difficult to achieve, had some significant risk. So it checked all the ARPA-E boxes. We also incorporated somebody in-house who was an expert in techno-economic analysis and T2M from the start in our team. And so even though we were a purely academic team, I think that gave us some credibility. We had all been working together for over 10 years, the team, and we'd had significant publications and papers and progress and patents on our team. So I think that gave us the credibility that ARPA-E was looking for. So they supported us at a seed level, which is basically $1 million. Show me, prove to me that you can do this high-risk thing that you've proposed. And then we were successful, and so then we've gone on to a phase 2 funding, which is with an industrial partner and has currently been launched, and that's about a $4 million program. So how many of you have a hot water heater in home? And it probably runs off of natural gas here in Colorado. So imagine if you replace that hot water heater with a new portable home generation unit, which still provided all the hot water for your home, but also provided all the electricity that your house needed as well. And it would do so with just a little bit more natural gas than your hot water heater uses today. And you could basically say goodbye to Xcel Energy and cut the cord on the grid. Well, that's the basic idea of our current fuel cell project. And this slide here shows at a really simple level the technology we've developed. So this is a new kind of fuel cell. It's a ceramic fuel cell. And 2 of the most scary things for fuel cells, especially ceramic fuel cells, is when you run them red hot, are they going to break? And then number 2, we want these fuel cells to run on natural gas, not hydrogen, because everyone has natural gas going into their home. So are they going to die when they run on a complicated hydrocarbon fuel? Are they going to coke? Right? When you cook something over a campfire, you get a lot of black soot. That's coke. Same thing happens in fuel cells when you run them on hydrocarbon fuels. So those are the two big risk factors for our technology. Is it going to break, and is it going to coke? And so this little video here, which we executed in the first year of our project, basically proved visually that our technology can address those big risks. So if we can key the video. So this is a tiny little demo of our fuel cell. It's about the size of a US dime for scale. And that's a butane lighter like you'd use to light your gas grill for a 4th of July barbecue. And so we're basically just feeding our fuel cell directly off of propane fuel or butane fuel from that. We're heating it up to 500 or 600 degrees very rapidly. And you see there's black soot being deposited on those lead wires, but the fuel cell doesn't care. And you see even though we're thermally cycling it up to 500 or 600 degrees C, it's not breaking. So that was one of the technologies that we're involved in with ARPA-E. Let's see, thoughts on making a successful project. So for us, I think a big key is involving techno-economic analysis early, making sure that's a key part of your team. I think the reason that we were able to have such success, particularly with that first project, is we had a team that had already been working together on other projects previously. So we had a tight relationship. We were all in-house. We were all at the Colorado School of Mines, but we were interdisciplinary. So we had the systems and modeling person who did the techno-economic analysis. We had the mechanical engineer that could build things. I'm the materials guy that was developing the new materials. And so we kind of provided the whole suite of expertise in a single location. I should point out one of our partners, Sandrine Yerkot's in the audience. She's also participated in a number of these ARPA-E projects. So some things to, once you get the project, they're very milestone driven with the quarterly site visits. And so the approach that we took is to focus our presentations on the milestones rather than just having a story about what we've been doing in the lab for the last 3 months. So each slide was a specific milestone from our statement of operating SOPO's operating project objectives. And we would state what the milestone was at the top, and then we'd have figures and data substantiating the milestone, and at the bottom we'd have a summary statement. Did we achieve the milestone? Did we not? And so having that kind of milestone-driven focus, going after the kind of most risky parts of the technology early, I think is what led to our success and led to follow-on funding from ARPA-E. Then I think also established our credibility with ARPA-E to go after these other projects subsequently. Team structure, budget. So we talked a little bit about team structure. So for the initial project, particularly for universities where you're probably looking at smaller seedling or smaller dollar award projects, if you want to go bigger, it's a good idea to have an industrial partner. If you keep it small as a seedling project, maybe it's not necessary, but it does establish additional credibility. So that's something to think about. I think I've said enough introductory remarks, so I'll pass on to Greg.
Yeah, and I'll just, Ryan noted that he's had 3 projects, and at some agencies, they might want to spread the wealth, but if you have performed well, small enough group, you probably have the same tech CETAs reviewing the proposal that had been on those site visits. So success sort of breeds success. I think here at CU, I think Al Weimer may have 5 projects. I think that may have been, that may be a record. And it's not so much that we're funding the institution, it's that we've had good experience with a particular person.
Excellent. Okay. My name is Greg Rieker. I'm a professor here at the University of Colorado. Ted Weaver is our tech-to-market person and now the leader of our spin-off company from this technology. So I'm not going to talk too much about the technology. Instead of a bio, I was going to tell a little story that Bryan Willson, who was our program director when we started our ARPA-E project, probably doesn't know about. So for me, before coming to the University of Colorado, I actually applied to be a fellow at ARPA-E, which is another way to get involved with ARPA-E. There's a fellowship program, and graduate students, when they graduate, can go out and be fellows and help develop the programs. And this was really all I wanted to do in life, and I made it all the way to the in-person interview, went to DC. Like everything ARPA-E, it's a lot of work, and so the in-person interview involved, doing a deep analysis of a technology you don't understand. And so I spent a bunch of time on this, had a really nice interview, and 2 days before Christmas, ARPA-E called me and said, "We're not going to give you the job." So this was devastating at the time, but ended up being one of the best things that's ever happened to me, because then I came on to the University of Colorado, and just a year after coming on to the university, Bryan kicked off a project at ARPA-E called Monitor, which was all about low-cost methane leak detection around oil and gas wells. And at that time, we had just demonstrated the very initial stages of a very effective technology for doing just that. So we put together a team from NIST, from NOAA. It was, again, a local team, but one that had been working together, which is a good thing, to put together an ARPA-E proposal. And like has been mentioned before, this is a Herculean task. And so during that process, I was thinking that maybe it is that ARPA-E was put on this planet to make my life difficult. We were awarded the grant, and I thought, oh, actually maybe ARPA-E was put here to help me out. But then we entered into the contracting phase. And then I changed my mind again. So the ARPA-E contracting phase is difficult, and it's challenging. Bryan and the team flew out to meet with us, and they go through a milestone negotiation. And we had built a team that we felt was pretty strong on the technical, we knew was strong on the technical side. And we had built a team that we considered to be strong on the tech-to-market TEA side, and it was going to be some professors from the business school and some MBA students. And I was 5 minutes into the presentation, Bryan probably remembers, and Nate Gorence, our tech-to-market advisor from ARPA-E, said, "Full stop, this isn't going to work." And this is not 5 minutes into the whole experience. And he said, in our experience, it's been very good to bring in an outside tech-to-market advisor. That's when we connected up with Ted Weaver, which has been one of the best things that happened to our team. So to kind of come full circle on this, I mean, ARPA-E was 100% right when we were going through this difficult contracting process. And so 2 years later, we're about 2.5 years in, we've hit all of our milestones. We've brought this technology that Ted showed from something of a laboratory novelty and monstrosity into a tiny little package sensor that's now operating in California and here and detecting tiny methane leaks from very long distances. So that's been very good. I think that the other key thing that's been talked about here is that ARPA-E, through the work with Ted Weaver, has forced us to talk with a lot of industry people while we're developing the technology. And I can't stress the importance of this, because it's fundamentally changed the way we were developing the technology and thinking about, for example, the costs in our technology as we were trying to reduce it. And that was key, and something that was very, very helpful for us. And so now, methane detection, as Ted mentioned, is a very hot field. Many companies working in this area. And you can see when you look at some of these companies that haven't gone through the ARPA-E process that they are missing sort of the mark when it comes to connecting with industry, and it's part of what I think has been our success. So that's been an interesting thing. So to move on to what I think are, what made our proposal successful, it's kind of the same 4 key elements that I think make any proposal successful. So it's a recognized problem, which ARPA-E brought to us through their Monitor program. The second thing is a novel high-impact approach. And so, we had this very stunning technology that had very strong promise but needed to be reduced in size and cost, et cetera. So we had that. The right team is absolutely key, in having all elements of that team. And then, of course, the right timing. So the technology had just gotten to the point where it was ready for an investment from ARPA-E to bring it through to market. So those are the key things that made the proposal successful. And then there was another question, which was, knowing what I know now, how would I have changed our process earlier? And I think, as has been mentioned multiple times, having a very strong tech-to-market component is absolutely critical for ARPA-E proposals. And so having the right person to help you with that is key. The other thing is these projects, and ours was a 2-year project, are somewhat not well suited for PhD students. And that's, as we've mentioned, in the 2 years we had 116 milestones and quarterly visits. That's very difficult for a PhD student that's trying to do classes and deal with other things. So we had research associates and technicians, and that really made things work. Making sure that your goals are aligned with ARPA-E's mission is absolutely key. So, you know, the NSF is a whole different thing. You know, if you're going to go after NSF funding, you get the funding, you write a yearly report, you can go in different directions, it doesn't matter. ARPA-E is very fundamentally different. So making sure that you yourself are on board with following that path will avoid a lot of conflict between you and ARPA-E. And then also making sure that the rest of your team understands what they're getting into as well. That is key. You can be all on board. If you're working with national labs and other places that tend to move at slower paces, having your teammates kind of acknowledge to you that I'm gonna be ready every 3 months for this milestone-driven approach is really important. And then also, finally, on a very small level, is building in enough travel funds, because with ARPA-E, they bring a lot of opportunity to the table to go out and talk with your customers, engage in different activities, and so make sure you've got that travel budget to handle that. So my final thoughts on working with ARPA-E: advantages. Extremely strong resources are available, right? You can get millions of dollars of funding to really push a project extremely fast. And this is an incredibly good funding agency for entrepreneurial-minded faculty. The disadvantage comes on the flip side of that. It can be hard to publish under the very heavy milestone-paced environment. And so you need to be conscious of that and really pushing to get those publications out as an academic, because that's not part of your milestones typically. So I think, in summary, working with ARPA-E has been interesting to me in the sense that now when I work with other agencies in DOE, NSF, I'm almost frustrated with their program managers for not being more involved, for not giving us the opportunities that Bryan and the rest of ARPA-E have given us. And so, our lab's marriage with ARPA-E was really a great one, but that may not be true for all.
So I hadn't heard the fellow story, and I'm definitely going to have to bring this up to some of the fellows, but I think it's Bessemer Ventures. It's one of the VC firms, one of the oldest VC firms, and they have what they call their wall of shame, which is the companies they passed on. They passed on Google, they passed on Apple, and so they have admitted those failures. And so I think not accepting Greg into the fellows program needs to go on an ARPA-E wall of shame.
All right, I'm John McKay. I'm at CSU in the College of Agriculture, and I recently was funded under an ARPA-E project that I'll tell you briefly about. It's using, basically coming up with technology and analytics for looking at the genetics of root traits. I also involved in a startup creating new varieties of cannabis that we started 3 or 4 years ago in Colorado, and sort of that trained me a little bit in some of the tech to market and entrepreneurial aspects of ARPA-E. So I'd be happy to talk to anyone about that.
Cannabis, finally someone invented a biofuels that makes economic sense.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So roots, how many people here are in the oil and gas or utilities industry? How many people are in the plant genetics world? Okay, I kind of thought that's the ARPA-E crowd. So ARPA-E recently has funded aspects of agriculture, particularly developing technologies to more rapidly phenotype or measure important traits in plants and scale that up. And so this Roots program, so photosynthesis, if it was a country, it would be the largest GDP, right? It's an important process that captures carbon and solar energy and makes things that we use, including all that oil people are burning. So the idea is if plants are capturing CO2, typically in agricultural cycles, that is being respired again back into the atmosphere, but if you put it into deeper roots with different traits, it can stay there longer. So that was what the concept of this Roots program. Next slide. So prior to the Roots program, there was a Terra program, which is for above ground phenotyping. And I applied for that with a partial solution. So as specified in the FOA, there were full, complete solutions and partial solutions. ARPA-E ended up not funding any partial solutions. And I think that is somewhat typical, although other people can comment on that. But then they spun out a separate FOA just on root phenotyping. So our project has developed new methods to measure roots in the field and at the scale where you can actually study genetics and do breeding. And this really hasn't been done at scale in any crop, even by the large players in the industry. So this is a 3-year, $6 million project. If I can go to the next slide. This is the team that I put together. So it's my lab at Colorado State. We connected with Iowa State because we're doing maize genetics, and we don't really do that at Colorado State University. So we had to, Iowa maize. I think everyone here even agrees that that's related. We also included University of Arizona because they were previously funded by another ARPA-E project, and I think that was a good strategy. Likewise, the Danforth Center in St. Louis is, ARPA-E really likes them, and so we included them in the project. C0, an engineering firm out of Fort Collins, Guy is here today, are involved because there are non-academic partners that actually get stuff done in a timely manner. And then we have other people in data science, spectroscopy, and soil science involved in this. And then finally, we actually have an ag economist doing the tech to market. This is an area where it's even the people involved in plant breeding, it's not clear that there's a big market for some of the technologies we're developing. It's quite early stage, say, compared to a methane sensor. So we have a research project around the tech to market. And that's all I wanted to tell you about.
Hi everyone, I'm Aaron Ptak. I'm a scientist at NREL. We have an award under the 2015 Open, and I think I have a summary slide here at some point. It's about a $6.4 million program for 3 years, and our project is to drastically decrease the cost of solar cells. There's a class of materials called 3.5s. If anybody's a semiconductor person, you know that silicon solar cells are dominant in the market. 3.5s are better. Sorry, Howard. They're better. They're used in space. They're used on the Mars rovers. They have a lot of advantages over the incumbent technology. The problem is they have the price tag to match. So our technology pitch to ARPA-E was we're going to make these really high efficiency, really awesome solar cells, but we're going to make them 100 times cheaper. And that I think qualifies as ARPA hard. So we have a new growth technique that we think can do this, and we've had a lot of success. The project itself is going pretty well. We're about 18 months in, and so far we've been hitting our milestones. I'm last on the panel, so I'm not sure I have a whole lot novel to say in terms of writing a successful proposal, and I really don't want to generalize from my one and only data point, but here goes anyway. So a few points that I wanted to bring up. One is that, and I think Howard talked about this last, it's okay to be bold when you're just talking to ARPA-E. ARPA-E wants to make an impact. These program directors are around for only 3 years, so you need to convince them in some way that within their tenure, they're going to see some real results. So as much as I don't want to self-aggrandize when I write a proposal, it's okay to be bold. You see actually the title, oh, I don't even think the title is on here. The title of our proposal was Ultra High Efficiency at Ultra Low Costs. My original title was something really lame, like 3.5 solar cells that are cheap, grown by HVPE, or something stupid like that. And one of my managers suggested, say what you mean, be bold. And I wrote ultra high efficiency solar cells, ultra high efficiency PV at ultra low cost. And I gotta admit, I felt super slimy the first time I typed that. But like Howard said, your reviewers are drained. They're gonna read the title, they're gonna look at the first figure, and they might read the intro. And if you can't grab them in that time, you're probably screwed. The other thing I want to bring up is tech to market. This has been beaten to death a little bit. ARPA-E's focus on tech to market is large, and I didn't realize when I got into this program just how consuming it was going to be. easily 70 to 80% of our quarterly reviews are spent solely on the tech-to-market aspects of the project. And we might spend 20 or 30% on the actual technical work. I don't, again, overgeneralizing from my one data point, but that's how ours tend to go. ARPA-E, I think we've shown them enough work that they believe in the technology. They think the technology can be successful, but if they don't see that pathway to creating a business and making real impact on energy generation in our case, they're just not going to be that interested. So tech to market, even when you're starting your proposal, you're starting to think about it, I would suggest going beyond back of the envelope calculations if at all possible. Engage with somebody who's done this sort of thing before. The speaker after lunch talking about tech to market, there's a lot of consultants available that can help you with this sort of thing. It really goes a long way, I think, to convincing the folks at ARPA-E that you're serious, that your technology is serious, and that you have some initial markets that you can enter even with higher costs, and that you have a pathway to substantial impact in terms of energy usage. The last thing I wanted to bring up was ideas. I think I would guarantee that basically everybody in this room has a great idea, and when you sit in your office and you think through your great idea, it's still a great idea. The challenge that we took upon ourselves when we were writing our proposal is we thought we had a great idea, but we wanted to test it. We had to go outside our office. We got out and we talked to customers even as we were writing the proposal, and we would ask them, what do you think of this? Is this useful? Is this at all important in the real world? Because as National Lab scientists, we're a little bit insulated from the real world. So we had to get out of the building and go talk to people. And you learn very quickly, you don't ask them, hey, if I gave you the exact same solution you're using now but cheaper, would you be interested? It's a pretty easy question for them to answer. You have to ask them what their problems are. What are the problems in the real world? What solutions have you tried? What solutions haven't you thought about trying because there was some barrier to that solution? What keeps you up at night? You ask those sorts of questions and you start to get into some really interesting discussions. And through those discussions, you start to understand whether your great idea is still a great idea or whether it's just kind of an interesting science thing or an interesting gadget that nobody will ever need. So I think those are the few things I wanted to bring up today.
Thank you. So different experiences, but there are a couple, some themes, and I want to start this out with a couple of questions, and then I want to open it up to the audience. We've talked about publications. You're all scientists, have obligations to publish, to support students. We've talked some about the difficulties in a very milestone-driven project. But I'm curious, how do you manage that? Have you been able to publish, and what strategies have you used?
I can start. So there's definitely a different mindset with ARPA-E than NSF. And so I think one of the strategies that we've adopted is we go for far fewer publications with ARPA-E, but we try and make sure that those publications that we do have are very high impact. So instead of thinking about 3 or 4 publications a year on an NSF project, you might, in a 2-year ARPA-E project, go for one big, like, science or nature paper. And that makes everybody happy. So not easy to do, but if you're working on an ARPA-E hard problem, it's going to be high impact. You have the chance of that kind of a publication. So just change your mindset. Fewer but higher impact, I think, is a good way to go.
Yeah, to add to that, so we work a lot with our tech transfer office. You can actually build intellectual property costs into your proposal budgets. And so what's important is to make sure that you have intellectual property filed on something before you publish it. You can still publish, and there's still, of course, risks involved with that. But having that patent protection or having the application in before you publish can help get rid of that tension a little bit. So, and I would also agree with doing a fewer number of higher end publications.
I'm on the second quarter of my project, so we haven't published anything yet. But the part of the strategy was to get funding that also for things that we're not trying to generate IP around. So we have we may, for sensors or for genes that affect traits, there may be some IP filed, but then we also have funding for the basic work to identify genes for other traits that we're not trying to protect because there's not a market for it out there. So.
Yeah, I don't think ARPA-E, anyone from ARPA-E has ever come to our review and said, great work, where are you going to publish it? Doesn't seem to be a driving force for them. The IP is important. Like, eventually this is supposed to turn into a business, right? As a national lab, we're not allowed to have trade secrets, so we're almost compelled to publish the secret sauce, as it were, which is kind of not what you want to do if you want to start a business someday. So you have to really have a balance, and it's come to the point where I've actually had to go back to management, and when it becomes time for performance review and suddenly I don't have very many publications, I had to make them realize that, yeah, things have changed a little bit with the ARPA-E money. They're not so insistent on publication, and at some points it's maybe a little counterproductive to publish some of the work that we're doing. So we've had to actually take that into account during performance reviews, for example.
So I want to touch on kind of a way that ARPA-E manages projects. I think Greg mentioned make sure you've budgeted for travel. And, you will propose a budget. It's very seldom that ARPA-E goes in and says, we're going to give you more money, and we're going to extend your project time. It's often that we'll go in and say, you've proposed a very large budget, and we're really interested in this piece of the project. Let's cram that into a shorter time. Show us it's going to work. There's high technical risk, and then with an implied assumption that if it works, then we'll work with you to expand the project at a later time. So I'm just curious, during the award negotiations, what changed from what you proposed?
So there's an existence proof out there that you can't ask for more money. So ARPA-E came back to us and said, like your proposal, don't like this bit, strip it out, and strip out this third of your proposal and do it for half the money. Typical ARPA-E, right? So we agreed. We said, take out that third, but you can't chop half the money. Give us some back, and then in addition to that, give us some extra money to do some extra work that could be useful down the line. So we actually went back and renegotiated with them. They reduced the scope, but we actually ended up with more money. So it's an existence proof. It can happen.
My original, so I mentioned I put in a proposal that wasn't funded, a concept paper to Terra, and then a proposal that wasn't funded, and then for the Roots program, I asked for $10 million for 4 years, and they said, we'll give you $6 million, so I chopped off year 4, as well as actually cut out some of the more risky proposed work that wasn't most interesting to me, so I think as the prerogative as the PI, and then the program was completely flexible, really, on what we put back in with that new budget number. So it kind of gave another opportunity to change the portfolio around to something that was aligned with my interests more.
Yeah, in our case, we proposed a 3-year project, and it was pushed down to 2 years with the same budget. And that's actually what pushed us from going with PhD students to postdocs, which ended up working out really, really well, I think, in terms of how the program progressed. And actually recently we've been approved for a plus up, which is an extension. So I think there's many different ways to work with ARPA-E on the budget. And the key is if you're nailing milestones and you're really looking like there is a path to translation, doors will open. So.
Yeah, so I had a couple different experiences with the different projects. The very first one was funded through the Rebels program. And we proposed, I think, around $2 million, 3 years. They came back with a $1 million 2-year seedling. They asked us, what scares you the most about your technology? What would keep you up at night? What do you think is not going to work? and then restructured the milestones so that those scariest things were basically some of the first milestones that we had to address. And I think it worked out great for us because we were able to kind of prove early on that yes, this was a feasible technology, and then led on to the phase 2 with a significantly larger dollar amount, an industrial partner, so we can kind of scale up the technology. The more recent project, Refuels, we started at the beginning with a big technology company. The technology company led the project, and our team now was a sub. And so the initial proposed amount was much higher, on the order of $6 million or something like that. Again, it got cut down, the scope got reduced a little bit, but it still ended up a significant project the full 3 years. So I think depending on kind of where you are in the technology maturity and where you are in terms of industrial versus academic spectrum, that's going to change a little bit kind of how ARPA-E views your project and the negotiations. And this award negotiations is a huge deal. It is a big thing. And again, the experiences were different. They're going to be different depending on the specifics of your program manager. So some program managers are much more laid back. Others are much more the alpha type. And so that negotiation process can be extremely stressful, or it can be pretty mild. And we've experienced both types. So it's really program manager dependent, at least in my experience, that's how it's been.
This is your opportunity to ask questions of the team. Do we have? I'm trying to think.
So I keep hearing that the ARPA-E proposals need to be high risk and about the 2 technical miracles. So then I also hear that, you know, if you meet all your milestones and your project goes well, then you're more likely to get ARPA-E funding in the future. So isn't the fail rate pretty high if you need technical miracles for your ARPA-E project to succeed? How many of the projects just fail in the first 6 months?
Well, so my experience with the Rebels program, which we've seen through from cradle to grave, I think they funded 15 or so projects, and I believe we're so far the only phase 2. There may be a second project that's going to get a phase 2.
So we've had, the projects I've had, roughly 40 projects. We've canceled or shortened 5 or 6, and that's about right. I think kind of our number is it's 12 to 15% get canceled. I've had a project from the first open solicitation that we canceled after 1 quarter. So there, the milestone, one of the milestones for the first quarter was a more in-depth techno-economic analysis, and we got far enough in it to realize that it wasn't going to be feasible. And so we jointly agreed to terminate the project at that point. We've also canceled the project when there was only 4% of the budget left for some, well, for reasons I won't go into. So it can happen anywhere along the way. You know, when NSF funds you, the education of future thought leaders is part of their mission. It's not part of the ARPA-E mission. It is getting transformational technologies. So it can be a little, and in fact, when ARPA-E's first solicitation in 2009, first thing I mentioned was it was strange how high risk the technologies were, and then about 18 months later, it started coming out in academic. Chronicle of Higher Education that they started cutting projects, and that was that sort of made the news because projects typically don't get cut at NSF or DOE unless there's malfeasance. So it was kind of a wake-up call that this was a different way of running an agency. But I will say that in general, if a project gets cut, it's it's not you're fired. It is, we do look for orderly ways to shut down the project. In some ways we'll say we're going to de-scope the project, shorten the timeline, and we may define a another deliverable that allows us to do a glide path. With this General Electric project on wind turbines that we canceled, we agreed to, they wanted to carry on a student, and so we agreed to finish that student's, fund him for another 6 months if they would publish and present a paper that said, this is why the technology didn't work. We wanted to actually document the technical reasons it wasn't feasible. So it was a you know a friendly negotiation on how to shut down. There have been some that weren't quite so friendly.
Yeah, just to emphasize, there are no quotas in ARPA-E. Program directors are told you have to cut 30% of your projects. So it doesn't work like that. There's definitely no quotas, but I had a project, you would have cut them too. They were supposed to see certain isotopes when they did an isotope experiment, and it showed that their original publications were not correct. So we funded them based on bad science, and they were gone in 6 or 8 months. And so it's up to the program director, but you can't even look at a program director's stats to understand it. It's very quirky on program directors' projects. No quotas, but no fear of doing it. It's considered a good thing, basically, to cut projects that aren't cutting it.
Other
question for Greg. When the RP gentleman said stop right there, how did things proceed from that point in your negotiation? She asked me to ask again. For those who couldn't hear, I just asked Greg to elaborate on how his negotiations proceeded after they said stop.
Yeah. So we were almost cut in 5 minutes. No. So it was it caught us off guard, but he brought up 2 good points, and that was the professors from the business school that were going to be with the NBA students helping us do the tech to market were not in the room for the milestone negotiation. And he said, where are these guys to help you with this? And that's a very good point, right? And if we'd had Ted Weaver on the team at that point, he would have been in the room with us. And so it was I would say it was very amicable, right? They said, here's what we would suggest. And then Nate went on to give me a list of 6 names. Call these people. You don't have to go with them. But I want you to call these 6 people and also be going to some energy things. And it was actually a panel similar to this where we connected with Ted. So actually it was amicable, but it certainly, as a new professor, I about had a heart attack and fell over. So.
Can I just add a point? I mean, I think every team should have a Ted Weaver if you can. I mean, that's amazing to find someone like that. A+ for a team. If you can't, or if your idea isn't quite at that stage, but you still need techno-economic analysis and you don't have it in-house, NREL has an amazing TEA branch. And what? You can't have them. You can't have them, but you can certainly put them under ARPA-E projects. That's a great, for all of us that are here in the Colorado or regional area, they're a huge resource for techno-economic analysis.
And I should say that I don't want to create the sense that you can never have university leadership on T to M, but we would look at it and say, are they engaged and are they experienced? There are a number of faculty in entrepreneurship that study entrepreneurship. The question is, have they done it? If you've got someone on the team who has launched businesses, has been part of growing technologies, then that's great. But we do look at the character of who's on the team, what's their bio. So being an all-university team is not a disqualifier, but it does cost us to look to make sure that you have the skill set that's needed. Other questions? Okay, with that, I think we're actually ready to go on to the next session. Thank you, gentlemen.